Good evening, everybody.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. So yesterday we did Vav, we'll go to 9. Okay, these are not so practical, so I'm going to go to the next chapter. Let's see what we got here. This is more practical stuff. I'm going to stop talking about the chickens and the eggs. We don't really have those so much of those today. Okay. But, so it says here in the next chapter, אסור לכבות את הדלקה ביום טוב, אפילו רועד ביתו שנשרף. Wow, so this is a tough one. Right? It's talking about extinguishing a fire, right? So on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to extinguish the fire. So it says here in the Torah, even if you see, right, that your house is burning, you're not allowed to extinguish that, God forbid. אסור לכבות הבקעה. Okay, that's the Torah. Let's see Bet Yosef. So Bet Yosef brings the source for this halacha. He says it's Perek Bet de Betzah, right? So the second Perek of Betzah. Chav Bet Amud Aleph, right over there. It says there, Be'amine Abaye Merava, right? So Abaye asked the Rabbi a question. Ma'u lechabot hadleka b'Yom Tov. What's the din regarding extinguishing a fire on Yom Tov? So it says, I'm not asking you in a case where, there's a danger to life. Obviously, right, in a case like that, you're allowed to extinguish it. That's even on Shabbat we're allowed to do that. So he says, I'm really talking about something else. I'm talking about when it's just a financial issue, right? Financial loss. Are you allowed to put it out? So what's the din? So tells him asur. They're not allowed to do that. So in other words, in order to save yourself financial issue, you're not allowed to extinguish the fire. So he objects against this. אין מכבים את הבקעה כדי לחוס עליה, ואם בשביל שלא יתעשן הבית או הקדרה מותר. So here, right, this brighter seem whatever, this teaching over here seems to be saying the opposite, right? That if it's for the sake of saving your house or whatever, from all kinds of, bad things, smoke and God knows what, whatever, right? Or that your dish shouldn't get burned, it's allowed. Hahi Rabbi Yehuda, so that's Rabbi Yehuda, he says, I'm talking about Rabbanan. So it's a machloket between Rabbanan, the rabbis, and Rabbi Yehuda. Perish Rashi says, Etive, right, explains regarding this. So it says, there's nothing worse than a fire which consumes the house, right? So how can it be that it's not allowed to put it out? So it says also it's need of Yom Tov. Why is that? Because you're going to be homeless, right? It's not nice to be homeless on Yom Tov, right? Right? In order you shouldn't have to sit in the street, right? In the sun, whatever, right? Or in the rain. So it is a need for Yom Tov. So the question is, right? Why can't we do that? So right, then the answer is in Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar lekaman mashireh ofacham nefesh desharu darish yaseh lechem. So Rabbi Yehuda allows this because he allows the preliminary stages of consumption. So that's also your needs here. So the Eid forbade, like the rabbis, to darshe lebado, right? That they learn the verse in a different way. So that's the machloket there. Okay, interesting. So what did we see, right? We saw that the Torah was stringent, right? But we see in the Gemara that there's a machloket here about this. So let's see the other opinions, right, that we have here. Ve'aran, says the Ran, katav she'acharim pirshu בשביל שלא יתעשן הבית, היינו מפני הפסד ממונו, ואין כאן צורך יום טוב שלא כדברי רש"י. So he says, right, that there are others who explain that when we talk about that the house shouldn't get smoked out, we're talking about that, it shouldn't damage your home from the smoke. Smoke damages the house. ואין כאן צורך יום טוב, so he says, it's not really a need for yom tov, he says. Not like Rashi, right? It's because if it's because we're talking about that the house shouldn't get smoked out, that he's dwelling in, so that's obviously a need for the Yom Tov, You need to have a house to dwell in. So therefore, even according to the Rabbi, it's allowed, he says. So he says, there's a proof in the Gemara about this. There's a proof. So what do we see, right? That the Ran here is more lenient than the Tur. He gives you more leeway over here, to be lenient, because after all, right, if you don't have a home, you're homeless on Yom Tov, right? That's not exactly a nice Yom Tov for you. So for sure, that's allowed, he says, right? And even according to the stringent opinion in the Talmud, he says, the Rabbanan. Okay, interesting. That's what it says in Mordechai. L'shem Rabbeinu Elchanan, right? In this name of this rabbi. So it says, because that which we asked in the Gemara, what's the halakha regarding extinguishing the fire in a house? So it says, we're talking about a house which you don't need for Yom Tov. In other words, it's like another house, right? Not the one you live in. Another home, right? Whatever, right? Your vacation home. I don't know. God knows, whatever, right? Whatever it is. So, you don't really need that one because you're not living there now. So therefore, there you cannot extinguish the fire. That's what he's saying. Okay, interesting. Um, so then he goes on, כתב אורחות חיים, says in אורחות חיים, בשם התוספות, name התוספות, דלקה שנפלה בבית שהוא דר בו, so it says like this, right? If the house, if the fire is in a house where he's living there, right? ואם לא יכבן, יפסיד מסעדתו, and if he doesn't put it out, he's going to lose his meal, right? His food will get burnt too. Mutar, then it's allowed. That's what it says. So it says regarding that which we learned in the Baita, im bishvil shelo yitashen habayit, that we're talking about the smoke, the house shouldn't get smoked out. Mutar, it's allowed. Katav Mordechai beparshat b'mfaresh b'Yerushalmi. Says Mordechai, that says in Yerushalmi, Hainu b'she'en sham avir. That's only when there is no air there. Aval yesh sham avir mashlicha. It says if there's air there, he can throw it. I don't know, whatever that means. We'll see what that means. So it says, why so? But isn't that Rabbi Yehuda? I'm talking to Rabbi Rabbanan. Katav Rif, says the Rif, V'chen Rabba, also says Rabba, V'chen Amemor, Kulhu Derdachu Lehai Matnita. So it says they're all pushing out this Braita. Ve'okmua ke Rabbi Yehuda, so they qualified this in Rabbi Yehuda. Remember the lav ilchatahi, so that's not halacha. The shamina mimina delet ilchata kiyai matnita. So we learn from here, right, that we don't pass like this Braita. Ela asur lechabot et habik'a min ben lachus aleya ben shelo yitashen habayit o akdera akol asur. So he says, right, that everything is forbidden according to this opinion. So you see, right, this is a stringent opinion over here. He doesn't really give you much leeway here, right, to be lenient at all. Pretty much you're not allowed to put out the fire in the house. So he says the commentaries have asked about this, that here it implies that the halacha is not Rabbi Yehuda, but it says in a different parak, Kaf Chet Amud Bet, Amud Aleph, Aminan, the halacha Rabbi Yehuda. Over there it says halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. Katav Ran says the Ran, so therefore the Raza says because of this, that which we concluded over here, that is forbidden. So it says that's because we don't paskin like that. But it says halacha is that it's allowed. The Ramban Omer says the Ramban, so it doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right like that. So it says because we for sure, he says we forbid this altogether. But it says there contradiction between two different lessons in the Gemara. So therefore he wrote, right, so it says, right, granted that we hold like Rabbi Yehuda, when it comes to, right, labors which are preliminary. So what does that mean? That from the Torah they're allowed. ולא דרשינן הוא ולא מכשיריו ומיהו מדבריהם לא רצו להתירם אלא כפי מה שהם קרובים לאוכל נפש. But he says the rabbis though decreed, and right, they didn't want to allow anything unless it's really like very close to being a consumption issue, right, eating issue. The grifat tanur hitiru. So it says, for example, they're allowed to shovel out, right, to rake out the oven. The gamre altogether, because that's like very close to consumption issue, right? The elo sharit because he says if you don't allow this, what's going to be is the simchat yom tov. You're going to prevent, right, having simcha on yom tov. About the sakin shamda, but he says when it comes to, right, a knife, mitocha shefshar b'shela. Right? If the knife is not cutting anymore, since you can borrow another one, matsuihu etzel akol, and everybody has a knife, hakol lo itiru legamre. So they didn't allow this altogether. Ela alidei shinui, you have to do shinui. We already discussed this before, right? That if you want to sharpen the knife, you got to do it with a shinui. That's what he's talking about here. Since it's possible to do like that, it says also here, we don't pass like that. Because since knives are very, right, very abundant, right, abundantly found. So this will not prevent you from doing Simchan Yom Tov. But it says regarding, extinguishing, right, your piece of whatever, right, some kind of wood, that the house shouldn't get smoked out. Kibui on there, and also extinguishing the candle because of some other issue. Even though it is somewhat of a consumption issue there, the rabbis didn't want to allow this. The preliminary things. Again, so also it says regarding putting eyeshadow right on the eyes. They didn't want to rely on Rabbi Yehuda. Only on the second day of Yom Tov. So it says the general rule is like this: we hold like Rabbi Yehuda. That things which are preliminary labors from the Torah allowed. But he says that the rabbis made some prohibitions there. Right? Some things yes, some things no. Right? According to what they are, whatever. Right? So that's already like a pretty comprehensive explanation of this, right? That explains a lot. This perush here, right? Which is from who? This was the Ramban. Okay. Interesting. So let's go on. That's the way the Rabbi Yerucham also says. He wrote there, right? Says according to what the commentaries wrote. So it says there's three different compartments here, right, in this halacha. One is like, for instance, let's say it's not even a preliminary labor for consumption. Amash. Really, actually. So it's there, in case like that, the rabbis were stringent. The asur kegon is forbidden. What's the example? Kibui aner mipnei tashmish amita. So he says, like for instance, to extinguish the candle in order to have relations with your wife, right? So the rule is right that you're not allowed to have relations with your wife when the candle is lit. So now, but let's say you have Yom Tov, right? So you want to, be with your wife. So, you got to put out the candle, right? And you cannot do that. That's what he's saying, right? You're not extinguish it. Because that's not really, an issue of consumption, right? So he says, therefore, the rabbis forbade that. So then he goes on. Also, right, to put out a fire in order that the house shouldn't get smoked out. Or right, or right to put the on the eye, right, the shadow, whatever. Things like this. So it says then there's another compartment, which is if you don't allow this, it'll cause people to refrain from having simcha yom tov. Right? For instance, like breaking out the oven, right, or kiraim, or the stove. Things like this. So they allowed these things. The third compartment is right. What? So we're talking about really things which are like preliminaries for consumption. So it says, but it's possible to do those things with others. For instance, right. Sharpening the knife, so using a different knife, but you only have one knife, right? Use another one, right? Or a skewer, Nirtzam, right? They got right dulled out, whatever. Things like this. Halacha ve'en morim ken. So he says halacha. We don't teach it. The Rabbim. We don't teach it in public. Okay. That's the end of it. Umash katav ve'en morim ken. The Rabbim. That what he said. It says Bit Yosef. Right? Comments on this. That what he said that we don't teach this in the public. Eno medukdak. So he says not really very precise. So he says, really, the truth is that even if an individual comes to ask you, we don't tell him this, right? He says, interesting. Okay. We spoke about this before, if you remember, right? We talked about this issue. Halacha, we don't teach it in public, so forth and so on. So then he goes on, right? Ve'arosh katav shaminan mehad letilchata kihai matnita. So he says, right, the Rosh, we learn from here that halacha is not like this, Braita. Ela asur lechabot et adleka ben lachus alea. So he says you're not allowed to put out the fire, whether it's to save to have mercy on it. We'll see what that means, right? Ben shelo titashena k'dera, right? Or it shouldn't get smoked out, the food. The abite in the house. That which is forbidden to, he says, to extinguish. It's talking about that the food shouldn't get burnt, shouldn't get smoked out. That's only, he says, if you can save it from getting smoked out without extinguishing. For instance, let's just remove it from the fire, right? Put it on different fire. But it doesn't have, let's say he doesn't have another fire. He needs to cook his dish, but with this fire. And if he doesn't put it out, right, the food will get smoked out. So that you're allowed to do, right? You're allowed to extinguish the fire in order to save the food from getting smoked or burned, whatever it is, right? We spoke about this before. So you see from here, by the way, that this issue of extinguishing fires on Yom Tov really has it really varies, from case to case. It's not really a uniform halacha for every case. So meaning what? It goes from like one extreme to another. Can you imagine? Like, for instance, as we said before, right? When it comes to some house burning down, we tell you, let it burn down. Yeah, it's $1 million house. Okay, big deal. Let it go. As long as you don't live there, right? But to save your steak, that shouldn't get burnt. That we allow you. So can you imagine a $10 steak? We allow you to save it, right? $20, whatever. Right? Today it's $20. It's not $10 anymore, right? $20 steak. Right? We allow you to save it. But we don't allow it to save you $1 million house. That's quite quite ironic, right? The whole thing. But that's what it is. Okay. Very interesting. Okay, there you go. So then he goes on. It's just like you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov, and bake. You're also allowed to put out the fire in order that your food shouldn't get burned. But it says difficult. Why? That all these Amoraim over there in the Talmud, they hold like the rabbis. But in the other place, right, different chapter, we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. So the question is, what's the halacha, right? Bottom line. So it says, right, possibly like this, that we say that it's halacha, but we don't paskin that way. So in other words, that's how he reconciles the contradiction, right? That it's not really forbidden, it's allowed, but we don't paskin that way to people. We don't tell people. This is also giving you a different answer, which is that something which is not really, consumption issue, Right? They were stringent, the rabbis, so therefore it's not really the same thing, So again, right? It's a case-by-case basis over here. You can't make a general rule, for this halakha. Very interesting dichotomy that goes on here, Okay, so I'm just checking how much we got here. Okay, it's not that much. We can, well, there's still more actually after that. There's still more. Okay, well. All right, well, we'll see what we can do. We'll see what we can do. We have a chance to finish it today. Maybe. We have a chance. No guarantees. Billionaire there, right? Okay. So he goes on here. So says this rabbi, some ask about the riff regarding this. That which we said, right, in this parak, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. So they also answered like that, right? That they're not equal here, I mean? It's not on equal footing, everything. Things are different over here. It varies. Yeah. So it says some things, in some issues, we go like Rabbi Yehuda, which is the lenient side, right? So he says, therefore, right, the rabbis forbade to extinguish the wood, right, because the fire, because we said because of having relations with your wife, and also because the house shouldn't get smoked out. But when it comes to your dish, right, that's already something else. They were lenient, right? Which is like the preliminary, right, of consumption. Mamash, like really, 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 mutar, it's allowed. As we said, but that's only when he doesn't have a place to put it, right? Besides that fire. He doesn't have another fire, a lower fire. So he's got to extinguish it. There's no other way. So what does that mean? He's got to lower it, right, a little bit down, so this way his food won't get burnt. Okay, good. So it goes on. That's when he doesn't have a place to extinguish it. So he says that's the opinion of the Rashba. What I said was like he doesn't have another place to place it, right? Yeah. About that Rabbeinu, but it says Rabbeinu, right? The tour, he holds the Esor Akol. He forbids everything. So as we said, right, the tour is very stringent here. Like we will explain later on. Like the halachot, right? So so this, by the way, is this is when he says here Rabbeinu, he's not talking about the tour, he's talking about the Rambam. Okay, interesting. Anyway, let's go on. So he says like this, right? The Beit Yosef. Rabbeinu Satam Devarav Kidat Rosh. So he says Rabbeinu, right? The tour paskin like the Rosh, Be'Rashba and the Rashba, right? When he says, so what's the halacha? Bottom line, right? Beit Yosef, right? It's telling you. So since the Rif and the Rambam agree, that's how we paskin, he says. So therefore, we don't pass like the Rosh, right? So we'll see in the Shulchan Aruch if maybe the Ashkenazim go like the Rosh. It's possible. We'll see, right? We'll see what goes on there. Okay, right? So then he goes on. And then we said, right, that you're also not allowed to extinguish the candle to have relations with your wife. The Bet Betzah, right? Where is that? In the second parak of Betzah, Chat Bet Amud Aleph. Be'amine Abba, right? Me'bar Marta, me'Abaye. Ma'o lechabot etaneh, right? Mipnei davar acher. So he asks, right, Abaye, this rabbi, right? Tells him, are you allowed to extinguish a candle to have relations with your wife? Right? Amar lo efshar b'bait acher. So he tells him, Go into a different room. What's the problem, right? Why do you have to do it in this room? Go into a different room. What about if he doesn't have a different room, right? He's got a studio apartment, right? He's only got one room, so what do you what do you do there, right? What's the solution, right? So he tells him, okay, fine. If you get only one room, you know what you do? Put a partition, right, between the candle and you. So he doesn't allow you to put it out. Right? That's the thing. Tells you to put a partition. Okay. Right. So now he asks another question, right? What about if he doesn't have a partition, right? What does he do then? We're going step by step right here. He doesn't have a partition. What does he do? So he says, right? So he says, okay, cover it with something, cover the candle. It's a kli, right? Cover it with the utensil. So what does that mean? Overturn the utensil and cover it. By the way, let me ask you a question now, right? If you overturn the utensil and you cover it, won't it go out eventually?
Doesn't that turn off the candle because of lack of oxygen?
That's my question. So then how can you do that?
Is it grandma?
Yeah, I would agree with you. That's probably the reason. Right? The word grama, it means indirect causation, right? So you're doing it indirectly, so probably because of that it's allowed. It's gonna take like whatever, 2 minutes, whatever, to go out, whatever, right? Whatever it is, God knows. Depending on how large it is, right? whatever it may be. So that's allowed to do. Because after all, on Yom Tov, it's not really forbidden from the Torah to extinguish. It's it's rabbinical basically. So therefore, indirectly you're allowed to do it with grama. Probably that's the answer. Okay, so let's go on a little bit. Okay, so goes on. So now he asks him again, right? He puts him in the corner, right? Tells him, let's say he doesn't have a utensil to cover it. What does he do then? Right? Amale asur. So it tells him forbidden. Right? So right, the bottom line is, if you don't have a solution, don't put it out. Too bad, right? Wait till tomorrow night. Okay, that's the way it goes. Okay. So they bring an objection to this, right? To this answer. So he brings this teaching, right, which you already saw. This teaching says that really depends on what it is, right? If you're doing it to, for some Yom Tov need, then it's allowed. So then, right, he's telling you, right, it should also be allowed here. After all, it's a Yom Tov need. I want to be with my wife. What do you care? What's it to you? So that's the question, right? What's the answer? So it tells them, Amale ahi Rabbi Yehuda. So he tells them, don't bring me that. He tells them that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. He's lenient, right? But he says, according to the rabbis, it's not allowed. Oh, right. That's how he answers them. Kikamina the Rabban says, I said according to the rabbis. I go like the rabbis, the majority, Usually the rule is we go like the majority, So why should we go like Rabbi Yehuda? That's what he's saying, right? The Katav Rosh says the Rosh regarding this. Sham Miperek Kama the Yom Tov says first perek of Yom Tov Betzah. Jafal Gav the Beilat Mitzvah Sharet. So it says even though, right, having relations with your wife can be a mitzvah, right? It's allowed. The perek Kama the Ketubot So he says, therefore, he says in ketubot, it says that it's allowed. 1 second, I'm sorry. Right. Yeah, so he says like this, right? Even though, there's a mitzvah to be with your wife, but depending on the situation, right? Whatever. Sometimes it's a mitzvah. So if that's the case, then what's the problem? So it says, what the problem is? It's a preliminary, right? The mitzvah itself, no problem. You can do as much what you want, right? But we're talking about the preliminary to it. And the preliminary, the rabbis didn't admit, didn't allow. That's what he says. Interesting. So what do we see from here, right? The concept is like this. That preliminaries for consumption we do allow in general, right? If there's no choice, especially. When it comes to preliminaries for other mitzvot, like being with your wife, that we don't allow. So you see, right? It really varies from case to case. We cannot learn one from the other. Okay, very interesting. So it goes on here. כתב הרוקח, right? It says הרוקח, מכבין בקעת שלא יתעשן הקירה, או שלא יתעשן הבית, right? It says you can extinguish the right, the wood, as we said, right? Which, smoking the house, it shouldn't get smoked out. שאינו יכול לשב או לכבות הנר, right? It's because he says, if you don't do that, you won't be able to dwell there, right? It's going to be, not right, inhabitable, your house, right? Too much smoke. So because of that, you're allowed to put it out, right? או לכבות הנר כדי לשמש, אבל אם יכול לכבות כלי על הנר, so he says, to be with your wife, you're allowed to do that, right? If there's no other way, right? If you're not, right? If you can't cover it, or you can't, all these things, right? As we said, right? כלי על הנר, או להוציא הנר בבית אחר, or let's say, right, to take it out to a different room. You don't have it down another room. Right, so you shouldn't put it out. It says, so in other words, he's telling you like this, right? If you can do it a different way, do it a different way. But if there's no other way, you can put it out, he says, which contradicts what we just said, right? Different opinion. Okay. It's like it says in Perek Yutet, so you see, right, you've got different opinions here. So he says, right, this rabbi, the reason why you're allowed to do it is because of halacha zek Rabbi Yehuda, right? As opposed to the Gemara that we just said, right, which is according to the rabbis. Two different opinions, again, right? This one goes like this one goes like that. Okay, good. So let's go on. לגמרי, so ולא קיים עליהם כפשיטותא דאביי. So we don't hold like Abaye, אבל כל שאר הפוסקים סוברים דקיים עליהם כפשיטותא דאביי. But it says all the other poskim don't hold like this, right? They hold that, we're stringent about this. דאסר לכבות הנר מפני דבר אחר. So it seems like he's telling you, right, that the majority of the poskim don't agree with this. So this is like a minority opinion here, that allows this to put out the candle for that purpose. Interesting. Okay, so then he says, right, B'simon Tav Tzadik Vav, in this chapter he says, which is 496, Nitba'er im yesh lechiluk ben Yom Tov Rishon Yom Tov Sheni, right? Over there he says, we're going to explain if there's a difference between the first day of Yom Tov and the second day, right, regarding this issue. Right? Okay, good. כתוב תוספות בית בצע, so he says תוספות, second break of בצע, חפת עמוד א', יש למחות בנשים שלא לכסות האור ביום טוב, אבל בשם ספר אגודה מצאתי כתוב לכסות האור האש באפר בלילה כדי שימצאו למחר ביום טוב מותר. So, right, there's two different opinions brought here, right, in Tosfot. One says, right, don't allow the women, I guess the women had the habit of doing this, right? Those ladies, right? That what? They used to cover the fire. What does that mean? They would take like dirt, right? And cover the fire. with the dirt. So obviously, right, what's the reason why that's not allowed? Because you're extinguishing. But then he says, right? But it says in the Sefer Agudah that I found over there, in the name of this book, that what? It says there's a bit Yosef saying this. That if you wanna, it says if I found written like this, that in order, right, to cover the fire with dirt at night, is because you should be able to find it tomorrow, biyom tov mutar, right? In other words, that dirt will keep it like going, longer. It'll extend the life of the fire. So it says if that's your goal, to extend the fire, the lifetime of the fire until tomorrow morning, whatever it is, right? That's allowed, he says. Interesting. Wow. Okay, let's see Shulchan Aruch and we're done. We got to bring it up because this is a new chapter. Tough proof you done. Okay, let's see that. And we'll put up the new one. Okay. So let's get into the Shulchan Aruch here. It says, "Asur lechabot lideka b'yom tov." So you're not allowed to put out a fire, as we said on Yom Tov, right? The general rule is you're not allowed to. Afilu im ro'eh beton shenisaf. Even if you see, right, the house is burning down, $1 million house, right, in Great Neck, Long Island, right, whatever, right? You guys, okay, you guys are different area. So, right, $1 million house going down the tubes, right? As long as what? There's no danger to life, right? If there's danger to life, that's a different story. Right? So, as we already mentioned, right? When does this apply? This halakha. That means you have a home to dwell in, right? This is not the house that you dwell in. Because if it is, right, then you're allowed to put it out. Because you have nowhere else to go. You're going to be homeless, right? So we don't want to make you homeless on Yom Tov. Right? So therefore, you can put it out if that's your house, the way you dwell. But if it's a different house that you don't dwell there, so then you cannot put it out. So what does that mean? Even though you can lose $1 million, right? Too bad. Easy come, easy go, right? Okay, that's how it goes. Okay. I don't know why I'm laughing, but it's kind of funny. Okay, so right, let's go on. So it says, "Ve'en mechabin habikat ve'afilu kedei שלא יתשן הבית או קדרה או כדי לשמש מיטתו." Right. Also, it says, right, that you're not allowed to put out a piece of wood, right, in order that your house shouldn't get smoked out, right, or the dish, right, or to be with your wife, right, to put all these three things. Yeah. So okay, so he's stringent here a little bit, but we will see, right, the whole thing. We got to see the whole thing until we get the whole idea what's going on. So he says here, right in the Ramah, so the Ramah says that only applies when that only applies if it's possible to save the food, right, without extinguishing. But if it's not possible, if without it's not possible to save it. בעניין אחר, without, in a different way, רק שיכבה, מותר לכבות. So he says, therefore, case like that, you're allowed to put it out. Canal Ikar, right? So it says that's that seems to be the halacha. וכן בבית, אם ישרף בבית, it says also if the house will burn, ולא יהיה לו מקום לאכול שם, he won't have a place to eat there. In other words, he doesn't have a home, right? Homeless. והפסיד סעודתו, he's going to lose his meal like that, מותר לכבות, you're allowed to put it out. אבל אם יש לו בית אחר, but if he has a different house, right, as we said, לאכול שם, to eat there, אסור לכבות, you're not allowed to put it out. משום הפסד בממונו, right? So he brings from the Bet Yosef, right, this whole thing. So, right, we see here that that the Rama is bringing you all these little details, right, that we saw in the Bet Yosef. So let's read this one more time, right? Because I want to understand if there's a difference between the Shulchan Aruch and the Rama here, or is it machloket, or or is just the Rama is explaining this. So I'll read it one more time, okay? So it says Shulchan Aruch like this, right? Asur lechabot hadleka b'yom tov. You're not allowed to put out the fire on Yom Tov, as we said, right? Even if he sees his house burning, unless there's danger there, right? So it seems like that he's being machmir, like the Rambam, right? As we said, because he said in the Beit Yosef, halacha is like the Rambam and the Rif, right? As we said. So he says also, you're not allowed to put out a piece of wood, right? Even if to prevent the house from getting smoked out, or kedera, right, or the pot, or kedera shamesh mitato, right, or to have relations with his wife. Okay, so that's the Shulchan Aruch, right? So it seems like he's being stringent here. I'm going to take a look at the Mishnah Berurah, right, and see what it says here, how he explains this. Okay, let's see. Right, so says Mishnah Berurah, as I explained it to you, right? It says that we don't allow you to do it in order to save, to save your property. That the rabbis did not allow. In other words, to save your money, right? Your $1 million house, right? Rabbis didn't allow for that purpose, to put out fires. Okay, that's one Mishnah Berurah. That's another Mishnah Berurah here. Let's take a look at it. Right, so there you go, right? Mishnah Berurah here does a nice job. He explains, right, that according to Shulchan Aruch, he's telling you, right, that even if you don't have a different house to dwell there, right, and it's going to prevent you from doing Simcha of Yom Tov, it's still forbidden according to this opinion, right? So who is this? The Rambam, as we said, right? So why is that? So says Mishnah Berurah, the reason is because it's not consumption related. This is the reason why it's not allowed. Okay, I'm reading on in the Mishnah Berurah here. He explains it very nicely. Doing a great job here. I have to see a Shulchan Aruch in order to understand this. So it's going on what? Right, so this one is the one we need. Dalit. That's the one we need. That's the magic one here to understand the whole thing. So let's go back to the Mishnah Berurah. Let's go to Dalit. עקב כיבוי זה, אוכל נפש שאין לו מקום אחר להעמיד הקדלה שם, شنو كيبويا بيقال من السيارة كل يخوض نفش الله من هنا فسك ذاك مش نفش Wow. Okay, so Mishnah Berurah here explains it very nicely, because the Shulchan Aruch here is telling you like this, right? You cannot put out the piece of wood, which is burning, right? Whatever it is, in order that your house should not get smoked out, or right the food. So now that's a critical thing here, right? That you would think, according to Shulchan Aruch, who's stringent over here, it should be allowed in order to save your food from getting burnt. That would be the logical thing to assume. But it says the Mishnah Berurah here like this, right? It says that it's not considered to be consumption related, this thing. Why? Because he says it's not really, crucial to consumption. So in other words, Mishnah Berurah is telling you like this, right? It has to be directly related to consumption. And this is not really directly related. So why is that? Because here, right, it's not going to ruin the food and make it like unedible. It's not going to burn it. That's the way it seems to me, to explain this whole thing, That's why he doesn't allow that. Okay, so what do we see from here, right? The Shulchan Aruch is very stringent here, according to the Rif and the Rambam. So according to this, right, we only allow you to put out the fire in order to save your food from getting burned, because you won't have what to eat, right? That's pretty much the story. But if it's something less than that, we don't allow you to do it, right? That's according to this opinion. So then, right, we go into the Ramah, and the Ramah is very lenient here, right? Relatively speaking, right? Like the Rosh, right? So what is he saying, the Ramah here? So it says that only applies, some say that only applies if you can save the food without extinguishing. But if you're not able to save it in another way, only unless he extinguishes it, you're allowed to put it out. That's according to the Rosh. Canal Ikar, so that seems halacha, it says. Also, it says regarding the house, right? If you won't have another house to eat there, if you won't have a house to live in, right? So then you're allowed to put it out. But it says, but if you don't have another house to dwell in, right? You're going to be homeless, basically, right? So then you're not allowed to put it out. You're allowed to put it out if you're going to be homeless. You're allowed to. So that's the lenient opinion, right? Okay, so the truth is, that it's interesting. I would like to do a little bit more research into this halakha, because something, needs to be explained here a little bit more. It's a little bit vague, this whole thing. So anyway, right, I'm going to look into it, Berliner. So hopefully next time we meet up, I'll have a better explanation for you, right? A little bit more clarity.
Could I possibly suggest that, like, if you had a fire going, like, I don't know, your kitchen catches fire, right?
Yeah.
It would be very hard to suggest that it's not going to be, if it's a home you're living in, it would be risk to life, right? Because even just the smoke from that could cause death.
Yeah, well,
right?
that's the thing, us poor souls that we live in apartment buildings,
Well, not
most
even
of
just
us,
that.
right?
If you live in a house, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the house catches fire, it would be hard to say, oh, well, just let the fire burn, it'll be fine. We can put it out if there's risk to life, right?
Yeah, that's for sure. So in other words, what you're saying is correct. There's a lot more to say. By the way, about this issue.
Right, but if it's your primary home, you can't stay there it wouldn't, to me, it seems like it would not be a matter of like, it's our primary home, we would be homeless. If you stay there and you let it burn, you're going to die. I mean, like that would be risk.
Right. So here's the thing, right? Well, I mean, you're not going to die if you leave. You know? So, okay. Well, but anyway, right. The truth is that there's a lot more to say about this halakha. We have to get, we have to cover it more comprehensively, right? We're going to say a lot more things. So a lot of the things you're saying are correct. In other words, we have to qualify all these things and discuss it, more extensively. So, Bezrat Hashem, we will continue tomorrow, right? And we'll get more dig more deeper into this whole thing.
Thank you.
God willing. Okay, very good. So, Bezrat Hashem, thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Right? All your possessions should be safe, right? And happy. Everything should be good. Bezrat Hashem. Laila Tov, Chazak Baruch. We'll see you tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem. God bless.
Kavod Harav, thank you so much.
All the best.